Thank you to everybody who's joining us today. We've got a great panel. We've got a great program set up for today. So I'm going to hand it over to the NJEDA's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Michelle Bowden, to get us started. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. I want to say welcome to this listening session. This is our intro to offshore wind. And I'd like to say it's especially curated for you, for you, our New Jersey community groups and nonprofit organizations. As a part of my role here at NJEDA as the Chief Diversity Officer, I am responsible for not only internally for our employees, in that we are representative of the community, New Jersey at large, that we serve, but also for external initiatives and external programs and services that we offer to the public, and having oversight over the equity and the diversity, and including an overarching sense of diversity and inclusion and equity within our external programming. Specifically today, we are here to really engage with you, our community groups, and hopefully to provide a foundation of what this industry, this offshore wind, which is a very important strategic sector for the state and specifically for EDA. We want to make sure that you are armed with the foundation about this industry, what we are intending for this industry, and also to listen to you and to hear from you about how you think we can best engage with the constituents of the state. We are having this 101, Offshore 101, broken down into 2 sessions, one being today and the next being next week on the 22nd. You'll get information about that obviously as well. But I just wanted to say welcome to everybody, and we thank you. Thank you for being here. I am now going to turn it over to Jane Cohen, who happens to be the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Climate Action and the Green Economy. We work hand in hand with Jane to both establish our industry, this strategic sector, and again, to ensure that there is equity built in at the very onset. So I'm handing it over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Michelle. I do want to welcome everyone here this afternoon. This is an exciting session, I think, for us, as we have, really been wanting to think through our engagement with nonprofits and community-based organizations in this space, and open up a true dialogue on how we can partner together to ensure that the opportunities that come to us from offshore and that come to the state, that we're working hard to seed in New Jersey, that those opportunities are accessible to all who want them in New Jersey. So excited about this today. In New Jersey, we really are committed to growing a diverse green economy. I think many of you know that I'm really leading this work across the administration through the New Jersey Council on the Green Economy. Some of you, I can't see any of your faces, but I saw the list, so I know that some of you we've definitely talked to in our process of stakeholder engagement around the Council on the Green Economy. But really the idea there is, as we make this transition to clean energy and to a green economy, which we are in process of making, we want to make sure that this is a intentional, inclusive transition. And so we're really thinking through, what are the policies we need to put in place? What are the recommendations? What are the supports to ensure that folks really have the opportunity to capture the long-term employment that we see coming out of this transition? And then kind of backing into that, what are the workforce programs we need, and what are the supports to help folks succeed in those programs? To be clear, we don't feel we have the answers. Our job really is to listen and to help connect the various resources that we understand are, from where we sit, we can see the various resources across the state. And so how can we based on what we hear across the kind of different sectors, how can we put together a plan that does allow us to truly have this diverse green economy? I've kind of talked through this, but just to kind of put a point on this, we've been working on this on our council work for a little bit over a year. We expect to have a report out in the next few months that details some recommendations around this transition. But I want to be clear that this is just a first step. This is not, you know, we did this one study and now we're kind of done. This is really the beginning of ongoing engagement on what is really a generational change and a paradigm shift for how the state is producing energy, consuming energy, thinking about moving into kind of green technologies generally. And so this is really the first engagement. So I welcome anyone who's on this call who I haven't spoken to. Feel free to reach out to me. My contact info is easily accessible, but also at the end of this slide deck. So you can find me and I'd be more than happy to talk with you about thoughts that you have on this process. And with that, I will hand this over to Jen Becker.
Hey, I'm Jen Becker, I'm Managing Director for the Wind Institute. So the Wind Institute for Innovation and Training, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about what the Wind Institute is all about a little later in the presentation. But we are developing the Wind Institute for Innovation and Training as an independent entity. And it's really charged with coordinating across stakeholders, that's government, industry, community, labor, academia, others, to advance the offshore wind industry in New Jersey. We're really looking to with this incredible opportunity to build this industry up here in New Jersey, in the United States from the onset. We don't often get that opportunity. We really want to be intentional about growing this industry in an inclusive and equitable manner. So most germane to this conversation today, you know, a big part of what the Wind Institute will be doing is developing education and workforce training programs, making sure that New Jersey has a prepared workforce to meet the needs of the industry, and making sure that New Jersey residents can access the job and economic benefits that this sector is bringing to the state. We're also the other core part of the work that the Wind Institute will be doing is advancing research and innovation efforts that support the responsible development of the industry. And the New Jersey Economic Development Authority is the entity that's sort of leading the development of the Wind Institute while we're working on the governance structure for the new independent entity. We work hand in hand with the governor's office and our sister agencies in New Jersey government. But that's why you see a lot of New Jersey EDA staff on the call today. So more a little bit later on what the Wind Institute is up to. But in the meantime, I'll turn it back over to Jane for a second.
Actually, based on feedback that we've heard, we wanted to do this two-part session to make sure that that we are putting out information and having really sort of a robust discussion and understanding of what are we actually talking about when we talk about offshore wind in New Jersey. And I have to say, I actually really could have used this when I started at the governor's office. You know, this offshore wind is not intuitive. There's a lot to learn here. And so I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to really kind of put it out there in a very fulsome way. And I do encourage folks to ask questions along the way to make sure that you're getting your questions answered and that you're fully kind of understanding all aspects of the kind of business opportunity here. And then our second session next week is really going to be dialogue based on how we can work in partnership to really increase access to these economic and job opportunities for the folks that you work with in your communities. As I said earlier, we don't have the answers to these questions, and so we really want to hear from you, your recommendations, your feedback, your thoughts on how we can you know, remove barriers and really make sure that the opportunity here is accessible, as I said, for all who want it in New Jersey, and that we are putting together the most robust program to ensure success for all. So thank you very much again for joining, and I'll hand it back to Julia to really begin the program.
Thanks, Jane. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Cordtree, Senior Project Officer, Offshore Wind at EDA and the Wind Institute. I'm excited to give you all a quick overview of offshore wind. Like Jane, I also came into offshore wind completely green, new to the topic, learned everything over the past 3 years. So a full faith that despite its complexity, and lack of intuitiveness, it's definitely an area that everybody can find their place in and learn more about offshore wind. So I will be going through the first 3 bullets here to provide an intro, talk about the development process and key players, and then the offshore wind supply chain and jobs. And then I'll pass it back to Jen for the rest of our programming. So first, what is offshore wind power? Quite simply, it is energy harnessed from the wind out in seas, converted into electricity through the turning of the turbine. We have historically, have lots of familiarity with traditional windmills that have been around for almost 2,000 years, as they used wind to grind mill and grains, or mill grains. And over time, they've grown and become more powerful. But most importantly, there is now a actual turbine, actual generator in them that creates the electricity. So they're in many ways become like a machine instead of a very simple contraption that they were as windmills. To further explain kind of how the process works, so when the wind blows, turns the turbine, spins the generator, creates electricity. That electricity is then transported from various cables to substations, to converter stations that raise and lower the voltage for it to ultimately get onshore and then into our electricity power grid, just like every other energy source that you use when you turn on a light in your home. So as we are thinking about jobs and opportunities, it's important to understand what the components are, because many of these are components that we'll be making in New Jersey or other states, or looking to collaborate to bring New Jersey businesses into the manufacturing process. So just real quickly here, you can see the blades, the hub and the nacelle are where all of the major technology is. I'll talk about in a second. The monopile, which goes into the seabed to support the turbine underwater, and then the tower you'll see above. These are huge, structures, which I'll get into in a second. But I wanted to note first that there are several types of foundations. So you may hear in the news or hear about different options for putting them into the water. In New Jersey, we are using monopile foundations because we are quite blessed to have more shallow waters fairly deep in the ocean, which makes them most cost effective. Sometimes you'll hear about jacket foundations and gravity-based or floating, and these at this point are not really the best design for New Jersey offshore wind. Because of our shallow waters, we're able to do a monopile, which is most cost effective because of how they don't have to go as deep, and it's quite easy to embed them into the seabed. And we'll talk about EW's monopile fabrication facility in our forthcoming slides. So within the turbine, the nacelle, the hub, there's all of the secret sauce, the technology. You see the generator. All of these components need to be produced. They can be produced potentially in New Jersey, elsewhere in the US, or imported. But it's not just these large components. I want to stress here, there's also all of these smaller components and subcomponents that need to be produced in order to create a wind turbine. As I mentioned before, they're quite large. We'll see the first turbines in New Jersey being installed between 2024 to 2028, and they will exceed the height of the Eiffel Tower. These are very large structures though very difficult to see when you are up to shore because they are so far out into the waters. So just a quick overview on the development process and key players. We get a lot of questions about why offshore wind, why are we pursuing this beyond our efforts for clean energy? It is really a unique opportunity for New Jersey in that it's energy created proximal or nearby large population centers, with New Jersey having access to millions of people near the coast. So the energy doesn't have to travel very far. The wind speeds as you go farther up the coast are faster, which means that they can generate power more efficiently and effectively. There are always questions around, what if the wind's not blowing? What if it's not blowing very hard? We know that we have more consistent, higher speed wind, so we can rely on offshore wind as a strong energy source for the state. And third, as I mentioned before, we have quite shallow waters compared to many of the other parts of the country who may have shallow waters but low wind speeds, or very high wind speeds in deep and rocky seabeds. We have the ability to be able to build out quite far out without having to build quite deep into the water, which can be quite expensive with the materials around steel and concrete. We're also being driven by a number of market drivers. So other states, including in addition to New Jersey, have committed to 100% clean energy. So there's a strong demand across the region for offshore wind and related renewable energies. We also, of course, are being significantly affected by climate change. New Jersey is one of the fastest heating up states, or it's been warming up most quickly. So, we've been feeling those changes. And then third, there have been already plans for decommissioning of coal and nuclear plants throughout the region. And we need to replace those energy sources, as well as be able to build for the increased electrification of our grids, as well as increased population needs. So if we weren't replacing coal or nuclear plants with offshore wind, we would be needing to replace them with something. So this is another step in that process of continuing to build and strengthen our grid. In terms of how the offshore wind development happens in the United States, it can be fairly complex at first glance. There's the roles for the federal government, state government, private developers, local communities. But there is a clear process that's been developed through community input and other concerns to make sure that that all of these actions in the oceans are done with thought and care. So the federal government, through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, along with some other agencies that support BOEM, or offices that support BOEM, identify, permit, and auction lease areas. So all of the wind farms off the East Coast are in federal waters. So they're under the jurisdiction of the federal government. So as they are identifying and permitting and leasing out these areas to private developers, it is typically the states that will be procuring that energy to incorporate into their transmission grid or into their grid system. So New Jersey Board of Public Utilities is our utility agency responsible for procuring offshore wind, setting our goals, issuing solicitations. So the developers will bid into this process to sell their energy to the state. And then this is, of course, supported by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, our agency, the Economic Development Authority, Department of Labor, Office of the Secretary of Higher Education, and the Governor's Office, as we take a unified approach to delivering offshore wind in the most efficient and equitable way. And then, as I've kind of mentioned, developers in multiple parts of this, they are really responsible for delivering the project. So while the federal and state governments go through the approval and the permitting and drive the process, it's the developers who are responsible for developing the wind farms and will ultimately sell their energy to the states. As you can imagine from this process, it can take many years for an offshore wind project to be developed, and they have multiple phases. So one of the questions we get around, how do I get involved in offshore wind? Where are the job opportunities? Who should I be talking to? A lot of those center around, the various phases of the projects, and I think is a helpful way to break down how offshore wind is developed in the United States. So first, there's the siting and permitting phase. It can take 5 to 7 years. This usually commences even before they win a contract with the state. They've gotten site control of an area in the ocean to be able to develop. So they're doing their siting, permitting, environmental, geophysical evaluations and studies. Lots of opportunity for local content and local businesses and workers in terms of going out and doing many of those studies. And then it transitions, once they've won a contract, completed their siting and permitting, into the manufacturing of actually building and assembling the turbines and other ancillary components. This is another area where there, I'll talk about a little bit about jobs, but another area to focus on, and then a few years to construct and install, and then the projects typically, or the wind farms typically run for 25 to 30 years before being decommissioned and potentially replaced with stronger turbines. You'll see that many of these projects are kind of staggered. So you'll see one Ørsted's project or one developer's project start the permitting process, the next one's in the manufacturing, and they just kind of go one after another. So there's a steady stream of activities at each of the phases. A few key players in the New Jersey offshore wind industry. First, offshore wind developers. So currently New Jersey has 2, Ørsted and Atlantic Shores. They've both won leases, or they both have contracts with the state that I'll talk about in a moment, and are responsible for delivering the projects. We have tier 1 manufacturers or original equipment manufacturers. These are the companies responsible for making the largest components of the wind turbines. So GE, as an American company, Vestas, Siemens Gamesa, Renewable Energy, are the 3 types of turbine suppliers in the United States that could potentially, provide the model that they're going to use. So it's not an Ørsted turbine, it's a GE or a Vestas or Siemens Gamesa turbine. And then other components like foundations are being developed by EEW, a German company, being manufactured in New Jersey. And then towers manufacturers, as I've listed here. And then the third big bucket here are utilities and power transmission companies. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky. So you have utility companies like PSEG and Atlantic City Electric, who also can be an equity partner or have a share in one of the developers' projects, being able to bring their expertise in transmission and power in the American and specifically New Jersey context to these projects. So you may see some overlap, like PSEG has an equity share in Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 project. And then there's the power transmission side, as we're thinking about how do we connect these wind farm projects from the water to onshore, to our onshore grid. There are companies like Rise Light and Ambark who are also involved in that process. So third, we're talking about offshore wind supply chain and jobs. So as I mentioned, some of the big players, there's so much more than the big turbine suppliers and large component suppliers. The supply chain involves large, medium, and small companies that deliver products and services in any of the phases of project development that I had mentioned before. They kind of all center around the developer, as you can see in this chart here. And they typically do a multi-contracting process or approach, meaning that the developer has responsible delivering the project, and then they subcontract out different parts of the project or services that need to be done. Some companies do this in larger packages, others, subcontract out more. They all kind of have their own approach to it. But I think what's important to note here is while companies like Ørsted and Atlantic Shores may be responsible for delivering the projects, they're typically not the companies that you'll be interacting with day to day if you were working on, let's say, workforce development to support a company in training welders or training electricians or training fitters and assemblers. It could likely be a smaller company that you'd be working with, but they're all working to deliver their resource to the developers. And then in terms of the supply chain and where to be, where New Jersey businesses come in, of course, they're the offshore wind projects, as I've mentioned, but there are also the transmission and grid solutions as we seek to upgrade our existing grid. New Jersey Board of Public Utilities is currently evaluating proposals to award solutions to help better connect future projects from the ocean to the land. And then third, around offshore wind infrastructure and facility development. We'll need to do a number of updates in development of ports, rail, road, other infrastructure, as well as constructing various buildings and support areas that will support all of these various efforts. So there's lots of opportunity in these three areas for businesses looking to get involved in offshore wind. So finally, I wanted to kind of get the conversation here started on our workforce and job opportunities that we'll continue to delve in further into the presentation. As you can see, there are many job opportunities. Most of them are types of occupations you've heard of, like electricians, plant and system operators, construction laborers, engineering managers, etc. I do want to note that most of the job opportunities tend to be in this manufacturing area, and it's where we've focused a lot of our energy to better understand. But with there being almost 200 job types in offshore wind, there's a lot of opportunity up and down the education and training and experience background, though it will come with time, and we'll talk a little bit more on kind of what our understanding is currently. So as I've alluded to here, most jobs are similar to existing occupations. Most don't need a college degree, but do require some type of training, certification, or associate's degree. And industry is, recognizes the need to do on-the-job training and value skills like communication, time management, and problem solving to be prepared to learn these new skill needs. So we firmly believe now is the time to be thinking through these training programs and workforce supports to prepare a pipeline of workers. As I mentioned, these projects take many years to ramp up, and will take time for projects to localize as Americans get more experience in offshore wind. Will be further being able to do more of this work in the United States. So we're excited to be having this conversation and thinking through, how do we support the long-term workforce development. So I'll pause now if anyone, or Fabio, if there are questions that we want to touch base on in the chat.
Yes, we currently have 2 questions. The first is, are all equipment and supplies made in the US?
So currently not all the equipment and supplies are made in the US. There are a number of limiting constraints there. So there are some basic things like the type of steel required for offshore wind turbines is not readily available in the United States and isn't currently cost effective to ramp that up. There are also components that are going to be probably never made in the United States and made in parts of Asia, where we see, certain parts of electronics always being made there because of the cost. But we do see there's an opportunity for a large share of the equipment and supplies to be made in the United States. And we're working to make sure that we are building those conditions to support as much localization as possible. And that means, workforce development, making sure that we have the ports and space available to be able to accommodate the unique specifications needed in the offshore wind industry. And Jen will talk a little bit about that in the next part of the presentation. So I'll leave that for the second half.
Great. And the second question was, for all panelists, do any of our panelists fear that a small group of foreign-owned companies are taking a dominant market share in New Jersey?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. I think it really goes actually to the first question. Currently, offshore wind is not an industry that has local, like a local domestic center, and that's exactly what we are doing, is that we are working with these mostly European companies to bring this industry to the United States, and then to have the manufacturing, the supply chain all be as US focused and New Jersey focused as possible.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about New Jersey's approach to offshore wind. Julia touched on some of this, but wanted to get into a little bit more detail. So we really think, offshore wind as a once in a generation opportunity for the state, for the United States, for New Jersey in particular. And when we think about offshore wind, it's really an opportunity to address our climate crisis head on, and help meet our 100% clean energy goals by 2050. But it's also an economic development opportunity, and really a direct opportunity for us to build a stronger and fairer New Jersey. So New Jersey has an energy master plan, and that guides the state's efforts to achieve 100% clean energy by 2050. It sets forth a strategic vision for the production, distribution, conservation of energy in New Jersey. There are strategies focused on actions to address underserved communities and job creation by investing in clean energy, like offshore wind. And offshore wind is a big part of our state's efforts, but it is one of several efforts and technologies we're looking to further through the Energy Master Plan, including solar, onshore wind energy, particularly from out of state, and other resources. So New Jersey really is an emerging hub for offshore wind. We have incredibly strong political commitment to building up this industry. As Julia had shown in that slide before that showed all the different types of the different projects along the East Coast, New Jersey is a central location, and that's a real competitive advantage for us. Under Governor Murphy set a target for 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind over the next 10 years. That's enough energy to power over 3 million homes. And we also have transmission strategies to connect that power to our grid. So when we think about sort of our offshore wind approach, we really think about it, we say in terms of 3 Ps when we're talking about the economic strategy. So that's the procurements, as I was just mentioning, our ports, which are really sort of our foundation to our supply chain investments to support the industry. And then our 3rd P is people, and supporting a strong workforce, research and innovation infrastructure. Julia had mentioned that we're taking an all-of-government approach to offshore wind. It really is sort of, an industry that touches on many aspects of what New Jersey government does. So we work with, the Board of Public Utilities, Department of Environmental Protection, many others listed here, and these are just the state entities. So when we look at sort of our current and future projects, and this really gets into that 1st P, that procurement, right? So the Board of Public Utilities, as Julia mentioned, is the entity in New Jersey that sets the solicitation schedule and contracts with offshore wind developers. So New Jersey has actually been quite transparent about our process to meeting the 7.5 gigawatt goals, or another way of saying 7,500 megawatts, our 7.5 gigawatt goal. To date, we've awarded 3 projects that help us meet to get to halfway towards that goal. So the first project was awarded in 2019 that went to Ørsted, and their first project is called Ocean Wind 1. And then the second solicitation actually resulted in 2 awards, one to Ørsted's Ocean Wind 2 project, and then Atlantic Shores. So both of those projects were part of the second solicitation with those awards made in 2021. The next solicitation will be coming out in the 1st quarter of 2023. And then we have a set plan for the remaining procurements to meet that goal. Taking a little bit of a closer look on the first 3 projects. So as I mentioned, sort of Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 is Ørsted's lease you can see in the brown polygon there on the map. So both Ocean Wind 1 and Ocean Wind 2 are in that geography. And New Jersey has really taken a value-oriented approach to offshore wind, so really looking to derive economic benefits to the state. And so through these projects, we've yielded a number of investments to support workforce development, supply chain, business development, innovation. So the first project, Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 project, just one of the things to note was the establishment of a $15 million pro-grantor trust, providing funding and support to New Jersey businesses to enter the offshore wind market and coastal resiliency projects as well. They continued on with that effort in their second award as well. And through the first project, we got the bringing EEW monopile fabrication facility to Paulsboro, New Jersey. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Ocean Wind 2 also, continued with additional commitments for big supply chain investments, continuing on with the pro-grantor trust, scholarships, and other commitments working with local partners. Similarly, the Atlantic Shores project, and you can see their lease area in the green polygon there. Their first project is only a portion of that green space. Commitments to workforce training, research, other supply chain investments, and additionally working with local universities and nonprofits to connect them and the constituents that they work with for offshore wind access. One of the things that had come up as part of the second solicitation was seed funding from those 2 developers, Ørsted and Atlantic Shores, for the New Jersey Offshore Wind Research and Monitoring Initiative. So there's now $26 million in initial funding. This is led by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and the Board of Public Utilities to fund research to assess the needs for research and monitoring, particularly around marine and coastal resources, identifying vulnerable resources, and putting forward research to address those. So perhaps you may have heard in February of this year, the federal government BOEM, as Julie was mentioning before, they are the ones that set the lease areas. And so there was an auction, and we have 6 new lease areas in New Jersey, 5 new developers. Atlantic Shores, which already has a lease area, has another one in there as well. So we have a number of new developers and coming to the region. And these are all companies that will now, are starting to commence on that first phase that Julia was mentioning before, the surveying and site assessment work. And so they will be positioned to bid into future procurements by the Board of Public Utilities. As I mentioned, our second P is ports. And port development is a big part of New Jersey's investment strategy to support and grow this industry. There are three main types of ports that support the offshore wind industry. So there's ports that are dedicated to manufacturing, and given that these components are so large, as was mentioned earlier, they need to be at the water so that they can be barged and transported by sea. And so one of the big ones for New Jersey is in the Port of Paulsboro, where EEW is currently constructing its monopile fabrication facility. And there's other opportunities for manufacturing ports in the state as well, including at the New Jersey Wind Port, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can actually go back. Yeah, thanks, Julia. There's also operations and maintenance ports. These tend to be much smaller. So this is where developers will sort of house where they're going to send their technicians or their logistics center to support the offshore wind developments once they're up and running. And then marshaling refers to the type of activity where all those large components are finally assembled and then transported out to sea to be installed in the ocean. And so I think what's just important to note on this slide here is that the wind turbines will be off the coast. Those are those sort of blue polygons on the right. But you can see that there's port opportunity and economic development opportunity throughout the state, where different types of activities will be taking place or can be have the opportunity to take place to support this industry. Just wanted to dive in for a second on the New Jersey Wind Port, because this is perhaps a infrastructure project that you've heard of. This is our big infrastructure investment for New Jersey, located in Lower Alloways Creek in Salem County. It's the first purpose-built offshore wind port in the United States, and it's uniquely has unique characteristics to serve this industry. So it has ample space for the large components, so for both the marshaling and that final assembly, but also the manufacturing of those components. And the wind port has space to create up to 1,500 manufacturing and operation jobs once it's constructed, and it's really unique in that there's no bridge restrictions or height restrictions. So given the size of these components, that's a really important piece. And we've developed this developing this wind port to meet the needs of the offshore wind industry and to bring benefits to Southern New Jersey in particular. So as part of the construction of the port, so this is, before it's actually in operation, we're currently constructing the port right now. And we have set new standards for minority, veteran, and women-owned businesses as part of the construction process. So as part of EDA's agreement with our construction manager, we have particular targets to support small, local, and diverse businesses to engage as part of the construction activities. We've also have an advisory committee. I believe some of our committee members are on this session today, to really help to drive and fortify those commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This project does have a project labor agreement, or a PLA, with the South Jersey Building and Construction Trades Council. And we also have specific affirmative action targets for the workers on site during construction. So this is a project that as we were mentioning at the onset, we are committed to building this industry in a way that really fosters and advances diversity, equity, and inclusion, and doing that as part of the construction of the wind port. So as I said, so the wind port will have space for both marshaling and manufacturing, and offshore wind developers and manufacturers have already expressed plans to locate at the wind port, including both Ørsted and Atlantic Shores, to bring the cell assembly facilities to the wind port as part of that second solicitation. We've mentioned EEW a few times. So this is EEW is a German company. They build monopiles, and they are constructing the facility right now at the Port of Paulsboro, set to open next year. We'll have a pretty significant job creation particularly for welders and painters. And given the size of the component, it is a different type of welding than we have historically done in New Jersey. It's called sub-arc welding. And so we're working with our vocational schools in Gloucester County and Salem County to integrate the specific welding equipment and skills training that's needed to meet the needs of the large-scale steel component manufacturing. So just want to touch on the Wind Institute and some of the workforce training programs we have underway. So as I mentioned before, we're in the process of launching the Wind Institute for Innovation and Training as two core objectives. The first, to accelerate the development of a robust and diverse offshore wind workforce. And the second is to champion research and innovation that unlocks market potential. And as I mentioned before, as part of the second solicitation with awards to Ørsted and Atlantic Shores, have committed, those developers have committed money to help fund the programs that the Wind Institute will be running. So while we are in the process of establishing the governance structure and the independent entity, we've been actually already at work building out a number of programs. And so just wanted to touch on a few things. So Atlantic Cape Community College is currently developing what's called a Global Wind Organization, or GWO, Basic Safety and Sea Survival Facility. That facility will be located in Atlantic City. And this will be a training that workers in the offshore wind industry at sea will have to go through, and it gives them sort of their basic safety training credentials that they need. Rowan College of South Jersey is another one of our community colleges, is developing a stackable wind turbine technician program. So as mentioned before, many of the occupations are not new to the state, but some are. Wind turbine technicians are one of the new ones, and so Rowan College is building a number of different types of technician training programs for people for that occupation. I just mentioned the work that we're doing with our vocational schools as it relates to welding and specialized painting that will be needed in heavy steel manufacturing, and looking to work with many more of our vocational schools and other education institutions in the state. We're currently in the process of doing a workforce gap analysis study to dig in even more about those particular occupations and timing of those jobs coming to the state. On the research and innovation side, we are also doing a number of initiatives. I won't go into too much detail on that for this call, but we are looking at developing the opportunities for a large-scale research and testing facility in the state that can really help drive innovation and business development here. We are working with a number of our public universities to establish a Wind Institute fellowship program, really to bring support to student-led research, and building up that talent pipeline at the university level as well. Just to note, though, that New Jersey already has a number of training programs today to prepare participants for the offshore wind industry. We have vocational schools that offer programs in construction, manufacturing, logistics, and other related disciplines. And those we all need to sort of leverage and build upon to meet the needs of this industry and help connect New Jersey residents with those. Can you actually just go back one more for a second, Julia? There we go. Just also to note that our community colleges we see as major partners here, our 4 years as well. Unions, nonprofits, other entities already involved in pre-apprenticeship training, apprenticeship training, and other sort of wraparound services that support all of these types of trainings that exist today in our state. And we'll be looking to compile a comprehensive list of the ones that are relating to offshore wind as sort of a one-stop source of information for people interested. Ahead, we're going to be finalizing that workforce gap analysis. We'll be doing more training grant challenges to support new and expanded training programs, developing offshore wind programming and curriculum for the K through 12 space, and really trying to build up that sort of long-term talent pipeline, working with our minority women and veteran-owned firms to support their efforts. And as I mentioned, sort of building out our website and having really publicly, readily accessible information for people who are interested in learning more about offshore wind. So, as we started this session, today is really wanted to give sort of a grounding of kind of what's happening today and what is offshore wind, how does it work, but really sort of the our goal here is to really hear from you all on how best to partner with you. And so we have a whole session focused on next Tuesday. I believe the link in the chat was so you can register for that. We wanted to give more space to have that direct engagement with you all. And so we can go to the next slide with our contact information. It's a number of us here today talking with you all. We really want to hear from you. We'll now turn it over to Q&A. I can see a number of comments have already been raised in the chat. Hopefully we'll get to all of them, and then hopefully invite all of you to register and attend next Tuesday's session so that we can continue the conversation and have it be really more of a dialogue. Here today we wanted to make sure that we were presenting and giving everybody the the overview of offshore wind, but are really looking to engage in an active dialogue with all of you. So thank you so much.
It looks like folks are using both the chat function and the Q&A side. How can nonprofits get involved in helping to develop K through 12 offshore wind curriculum and resources?
I mean, that is the exact purpose for the session today and next week. We really want to hear from you all about what perhaps you've done in working on other topics in workforce training or education, and so that we can see how best to partner with you. But we do really see that there's not just an opportunity, but a need to partner with a number of organizations, educational organizations, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations to deliver on both of the education and training aspects.
So I see Fabio's actually started to organize our questions by category. Do you want to start with some of the jobs questions, since we're kind of in that area, and then we can talk about, we've got some questions, developers, environment, and then just some overall questions.
Of course. So one of the common questions we've gotten about jobs is, will most of these jobs be associated with union workers? And what will be done to ensure that other non-union folks are able to benefit from these opportunities?
There definitely will be portions of the work that are union, and then there'll be portions of the work that are not. And so we're really looking at, through for example, just the New Jersey Windport construction project. That is a union project, and working to really build in high quality jobs in the construction. The developers, and perhaps you've seen in the news, have announced specific memorandums of understanding with sort of national building trades, particularly around the construction of the various parts of the offshore wind farm. So it will be a mix of both union and non-union if you look at the entire the breadth of occupations.
Great. What are the plans to educate youth in regards to career exploration to help create a pipeline of talent for the sector's workforce? And also, Jen, there's a question about VOTEX, and we could speak more to our current programs.
Sure. So we definitely see there's a real need to engage in the with our K through 12 education system, and really sort of bring to light what this industry is. What does it mean for our state? What are the career opportunities? If we think about wind turbine technicians, many of them are probably in middle school today, right? And so we really need to think about the trajectory of when some of these positions will be coming online, making sure that we're sharing at an early age and sort of exposing young people to the opportunity and to this industry. And so as I mentioned, sort of we'll be looking to develop curriculum and working with our schools, not just our vocational schools, but other schools as well. On the vocational schools, so you mentioned that in particular, we are already directly engaging with them. I think that's a really core constituency for us to partner with. We started that, and we'll certainly be continuing to do so.
Great. How might there be assurance that environmental justice is incorporated into green job training and access? How will diversity be prioritized for the unionized jobs?
So we are, the real impetus, or one of the impetus for having this conversation is actually that we really want to make sure that we are engaging with our community-based organizations who are working hand in hand with our residents to make sure that we are being intentional and to, we have this goal of driving diversity, equity, inclusion, and really putting that into action and working with our community-based organizations in particular, but other entities as well to do that. This is also a big focus of the Green Councils that Jane popped on. Perhaps you wanted to chime in there as well.
Thanks, Jen. And it's a good question. And it's one that we're, excuse me again, it's one that we're very focused on, is how, working in partnership with organizations and groups across the state, how can we ensure that these new job opportunities that are being created are focused to a certain extent on overburdened, underserved communities? How can we make sure that folks really do have the opportunity to be in these jobs? And that is why we are really trying to elicit as much kind of feedback as we possibly can. Again, kind of partnering with the Green Jobs Council. We've done a lot of stakeholder engagement on this very question, including having environmental justice advocates on the council. So really trying to make sure that in the DNA of the programs and the recommendations that we make, that really focusing on environmental justice communities is part of that. So, again, this is something that we want to work with all of you on, and I think, removing barriers, removing different kind of pain points in terms of access to opportunities. And we're very focused on thinking about how to do that. I think feedback from all of you on sort of best practices or, ways to do that more effectively, we are very open to.
Question that we received is, are there data of the onshore impacts from offshore wind in terms of acres development, wetland loss to build facilities, roads, ports development, or other general environmental impacts of the emerging industry?
Well, everything that happens with offshore wind, generally onshore, requires to go through a very rigorous permitting process through the Department of Environmental Protection. So all of that is really very closely monitored and kind of understood through our regulatory agencies.
More workforce questions, but when will the jobs be available, and how can people become competitive towards getting these jobs?
So the jobs are beginning today, but there, as Julia mentioned, and so it's a long development process. And so, construction at the New Jersey Wind Park, for example, is begun. Manufacturing, the construction of the Paulsboro EW facility is under construction, with the manufacturing starting next year. So, and the jobs hiring starting for next year. So there is a process. It's going to be continuously ramping up over the next few years. We expect to see the first turbine spinning in the water in the mid 2020s. So it's definitely a long process, but the job opportunities are starting and are going to continue to increase.
And how can we accommodate for language barriers to ensure inclusion in the offshore wind industry?
Maybe I'll take that one if I could. So language, we have internal to EDA already built into our process is what we call language access. And this would obviously extend, the governor's office as well has, their process for language access and making these, any materials written or presentation wise available in for sure, the top 12 languages in the state as identified by our census, but also, we take great pains to, assist where needed as it relates to language access. We have our own, we have contracted with translators and with folks that can help to, have dialogue with folks that are in their native tongue. So we want to ensure that this is accessible, and that we have a process in place, when needed and if needed.
Great. And if the PLA requires 18% minority hires, as was previously mentioned, how will that be guaranteed and documented? How will we ensure that the developers are engaging a diverse group of contractors and employees?
Yeah, so specifically with our Windport, we looked for the construction to absolutely include goals on the project as it relates to contracting. We know that statewide, we're not at the point where we have statewide procurement MWBE goals, but we were able to establish goals on this particular project because we underwent a disparity study, for lack of a better term, right? I think some folks are familiar with that, but we did our own disparity study with Rutgers in order to stand that up. That with this particular wind project, our Windport construction project, we took great pains to ensure that we have MWBE participation in our contracting. We underwent a disparity study within EDA so that we could put and make sure that we have goals associated with the Windport project. There are no statewide procurement goals as of yet, but as we know, our disparity study, Treasury's disparity study, is in process. But we could not wait for that we couldn't wait for that disparity study to be final. There's a process that happens with that. So we did our own disparity study specifically for this project. We have a 15% MWBE goal, and we, are taking great pains to stimulate that engagement with our MWBEs, including our veterans. We have a service disabled that is a statewide requirement and goal on our contracts, on any procurement contracts, any procured contracts with the state. So that absolutely flows into our Windport, our construction of the Windport. But we are very focused and very committed to ensuring that we have the inclusion there. Now, on the worker side, we are going to really rely on our affirmative action, and because this is a union project, obviously our prevailing wage. But what we did do with this project, because we anticipate that our Windport project will be pulling workers from the surrounding counties, Salem County, Camden County, Burlington County, Atlantic County. What we did is we took those requirements, those affirmative action requirements that are already in place, already the law, but we blended that to ensure that we have those goals on the project. Now, with that said, we know we are working with our unions to ensure that we have the availability of minority and women-owned workers. It's obviously work that we take very seriously, and we know that we realize that we have to have the unions to work in tandem with us to make that happen. So that's just a bit about some of the steps that we're taking to ensure on both ends. Construction, building of the Windport, and folks working at the Windport. Okay, so hopefully that sheds a bit of light on that, and hopefully you all heard me.
That was great. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
There's some questions about how CBOs can get involved, and Jen, I'm actually going to turn this to you. How can a nonprofit get involved in the offshore wind industry, specifically in developing K-12 offshore wind curriculum?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think as we are looking to develop a curriculum, we would likely be going for procurements to help support that effort. But I think we're really, again, as I was starting to say before, a real goal of ours goal of ours is to engage really directly with community-based organizations, whether that's sort of on the education piece, on the training piece, or others. And so, looking to hear from you all about how the types of activities or support services that you can provide, whether that's working sort of directly in partnership with the state or partnering with another entity, a school, a training provider, et cetera, so that we're sort of leveraging all the various expertise that different entities can bring to the table. I think this is really going to be a multi-pronged approach that we're going to have to take to expand sort of our education efforts in offshore wind and our training efforts in this industry as well. So I think there's lots of ways to get involved. This is, I think, participating in this this effort today, the session next week, where we really want to dig into that even more and hear from you all on how you have partnered with others in the past, be it the state or other organizations or the types of programs that you put forward that have been really successful and sort of best practices that we should be looking to as we build up this industry.
Great. Thank you. And will there be other training opportunities available for New Jerseyans that want to learn more about the offshore wind industry and get involved in the industry as either workers, which is informed residents?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we are just getting started. As I was mentioning before, we've awarded a number of grants and entered into memorandums of understanding with some of our vocational schools to develop training programs that are just going to start to be coming online. So there's going to be many more of those coming as we develop sort of targeted training programs for the offshore wind industry. And we certainly hope that we're working with our community-based organizations and others to develop and implement those programs.
And are there jobs that will be available for folks that don't have high-level degrees? One of the questions was framed in the way that a lot of the current jobs are for higher level, more office-based jobs. But will there be jobs that don't require specific training or a high-level degree?
Yeah, so if you kind of think back to that slide that Julia had presented about the different phases, we're for the most part in that that first phase, which is sort of surveying and permitting, which for the bulk of the jobs involved in that do require higher education degrees. But there are many jobs across the 200 or so occupations that don't. And as we enter sort of more definitively into the construction phase of the project and manufacturing, those are certainly places where there are job occupations that don't necessarily require a college degree, but perhaps an associate's degree or even a certificate or some more on the job training. I know there were some questions in the chat about, and it was raised before about unions, so certainly apprenticeships are part of that as well, that wouldn't require a higher a college degree or higher.
And on research and development, one of the questions from the audience was, given that most of the technology is being imported from Europe currently, do you foresee a scenario where local research and development efforts in the States or New Jersey will get ahead and help us become an exporter of technology in the future?
We are certainly looking to build up our sort of a research and innovation capacity in offshore wind. So it's certainly true. Offshore wind is a much more established industry in Europe, and a lot of the innovation in the industry is centered there. But we are looking to invest in a variety of programs and infrastructure to build up sort of that research and innovation capacity here in the state. I may have touched on it maybe too briefly to have resonated, but one of the projects the Wind Institute is going to be launching soon is a feasibility study for a large-scale research and testing facility. So, there's no reason that the next big innovation for wind turbines couldn't be coming from New Jersey, and we already have a number of research laboratories and other assets here already that can, that are contributing and can continue to contribute to research and innovation in offshore wind.
is the state including any clawback provisions when awarding offshore wind projects? For example, say one developer has projects, is a fossil fuel company, and they have decades-long rap sheet for nefarious activities across the globe. Will the state of New Jersey take any considerations into the previous work of these developers in awarding new projects?
Totally understand the question. Especially because a lot of the companies that we see getting into offshore wind are companies that, are oil and gas companies that I think in a good way are seeing the need to adapt and change for the future. So that's a good thing. In terms of, the state of New Jersey being able to hold one of these companies kind of accountable for actions that they've taken in places outside of New Jersey, that's not really what we're able to do through that mechanism. We have our own sort of mechanisms for polluters within New Jersey. But what we are looking to see is these developers really making investments in our communities outside of just kind of offshore wind energy. So, thinking about projects around green hydrogen or zero emission vehicles, and really trying to kind of leverage those investments to contribute to our emissions reductions and move to clean energy kind of more generally across the board than even just on offshore wind.
So there is a recent project that was announced in the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, 80 miles to the north of, is there a risk that these ports start to compete and cannibalize each other, similar to what has happened with the shipping industry?
So there's a need for many ports to support the offshore wind industry around along the East Coast. And so, right now, there's several different ports in development, but it's going to take many of those ports to meet the overarching needs of the industry. So as I mentioned before, there's different types of ports. There's ports that are very specific for marshaling, which is that final assembly of the components before they go out to the ocean for installation. There's ports that are for manufacturing. The New Jersey Wind Port is a unique port in that it'll have space for both manufacturing and marshaling operations and maintenance. So there's a real need for many more ports than we have now to meet these needs. So I don't see the concern certainly in the foreseeable future about sort of that cannibalization of ports. The South Brooklyn Marine Terminal project is being developed, and it's in the near term will be supporting a project by Equinor, which is a developer that has a contract with New York State for offshore wind. But then, once those projects are installed, could be, potentially used to support other projects as well. And that's also where the O&M facility, I believe, for that particular project as well. So it has multiple uses. But again, there's going to be a need for many ports and different types of ports as well.
Thank you, Jen. So we're actually getting a bunch of questions about the next event. So I think it'd be great, Jen, if you can give us an overview of what the next event will entail.
Sure. So we wanted to have this first event where we were sort of providing information that we have for everybody, and sort of make sure that everybody kind of, if there were terms that people had heard in the news or they weren't quite familiar with it, sort of providing that type of information, giving some space for that type of sort of technical Q&A. Our next session, we really want to have it be a more of an active dialogue, a virtual focus group, if you will, really a listening session. We really want to hear from you all. Our intention is to post some questions, some broad questions, really about, what do you see sort of as the barriers for, and really kind of focus on workforce training, I should say. What are the barriers that you see for people to enter the offshore wind industry, employment-wise? What are the ways that you suggest sort of, or that you have seen and successfully sort of address those barriers? How can different types of organizations, community-based organizations serving overburdened communities, participate in and partner with the state as we look to develop these programs and projects? So we really want to hear from you all. what are you seeing? What's worked well for you in the past? What hasn't worked well for you in the past? We really want to have sort of an honest and robust dialogue with you all.
Great. Thank you. And actually, I do see Carol just raised a question in the chat as well about the depth and distance for pilot drivings in the developments. Any insights that folks can provide on that?
I'm not sure, and I think we'd have to go back. I think I don't think we have some of the answers to some of these technical questions since we're coming from the economic development side. So we will have to get back to them on those questions.
Great.
But I would say, the piles and the depths obviously are related to the, the specifics of the seafloor.
Okay, great.
I'm going back through the chat also, just seeing if there's questions that we haven't answered.
Jen, I just want to add one thing, which is I hear a lot of, and I'm seeing a lot of questions around kind of union versus non-union labor. And I did want to just underscore the fact that we are kind of aware of the concerns around these questions and, work that traditionally has been union or is often union. How are we thinking about that work in terms of, the clean energy economy generally, and then also, at the port specifically. We are thinking about, for example, how do we expand access to pre-apprenticeship programs, to kind of paid pre-apprenticeship opportunities? How are we working together with our unions to provide kind of entry points into that workforce? And so, it's coming up a lot. And so I did want to just make sure that, we really acknowledge that that's a concern, and it's something that we are really thinking about as well.
I'm just looking at some of the other, any other questions that we missed. There was a question about EDA supporting solar. Our focus today is about offshore wind, but EDA, working with the Board of Public Utilities, supports sort of the wide range of clean energy technologies. So there are certainly efforts to support solar and other clean energy, but not the focus of today's webinar. But certainly that's part of our state's efforts to meet the 100% clean energy goals. There were some other questions about sort of EISs, and so the process for the offshore wind development go through a NEPA process. Anything that's requiring where the state EIS process is triggered would go through the state EIS process. So all of that is assessed according to the environmental laws pertaining to that jurisdiction.
Well, and also all the offshore wind plants also have to go through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and EIS process, run through BOEM. So there's a lot of focus and effort on ensuring that this industry kind of meets environmental standards.
Yeah. So I think as we're coming to time, just really want to thank everybody so much for participating in the conversation or the discussion today, for sharing your questions, for your time. We really do hope that you continue with us next week, where we can continue that conversation, more sort of active dialogue, hearing from you all. And we see this sort of as the beginning, these two sessions, not the end. We really want to have this be as a launching point for continued collaboration with our nonprofit and community-based organization community in the state.